I spent 2 years on my honors thesis. 2 years of research, data collection, analysis, writing, revising. 2 years of my life poured into a single project that I believed would launch my academic career and help me get into a top graduate program. The thesis was about social media's impact on political polarization among Gen Z voters, specifically how algorithm-driven content feeds create echo chambers that reinforce existing beliefs and prevent exposure to opposing viewpoints. I'd conducted original research, surveyed over 500 college students, analyzed thousands of social media posts, and developed a framework for understanding how these digital echo chambers form and strengthen over time. It was good work. Really good work. My thesis advisor, Professor David Morrison, had told me so repeatedly throughout the process. "This is publication quality research, Sophie," he'd said during one of our meetings in the spring of my senior year. "You should seriously consider submitting this to a journal after you graduate. This could be a foundational piece in your field." I'm Sophie Reyes, 23 years old, and I graduated from Northwestern University last June with a degree in communications and a focus on digital media. I'd spent my entire senior year working on my thesis under Professor Morrison's supervision. He was a respected scholar in the field, published extensively, well-connected in academic circles. Having him as my advisor felt like winning the lottery. He'd been supportive throughout the process, meeting with me weekly, giving detailed feedback on my drafts, pushing me to think more deeply about my findings. I'd trusted him completely. My thesis defense in May had gone perfectly. The committee praised my work, asked thoughtful questions, and ultimately gave me highest honors. Professor Morrison beamed like a proud parent. "You should be very proud of this work," he told me afterward. "It's truly exceptional. I'll be citing it in my own research for years." I graduated in June, feeling accomplished and ready for the next chapter. I'd applied to graduate programs for the following fall, using my thesis as my writing sample. I'd been accepted to several top programs and had chosen to attend Columbia for my master's in political communication. The summer after graduation, I worked as an intern at a political consulting firm in Chicago, gaining practical experience before starting grad school. Professor Morrison and I stayed in occasional email contact. He'd written me a strong recommendation letter, and I'd thanked him, updating him on my graduate school plans. In December, 6 months after graduation, I was scrolling through my Twitter feed during a lunch break when I saw a post from an academic journal I followed, the Journal of Digital Communication Studies. New publication, Echo Chambers and Political Polarization: How Social Media Algorithms Shape Gen Z Political Beliefs, by Dr. David Morrison. My stomach dropped. I clicked through to the abstract. It described research on social media's role in creating political echo chambers among Gen Z voters. The methodology mentioned surveys of college students and analysis of social media content. The findings discussed a framework for understanding echo chamber formation. It was my thesis, my exact research. I accessed the full article through my alumni library access. As I read, my hands started shaking. The introduction used different wording, but the argument structure was identical to mine. The literature review cited the same sources I'd cited in almost the same order. The methodology section described my exact research design, my surveys, my sampling method, my analytical framework, but most damningly, entire sentences were lifted word for word from my thesis. Phrases I'd labored over, specific formulations I'd crafted, technical terminology I'd defined, all there, unchanged, attributed to Professor Morrison. The data was my data. The graphs were my graphs, slightly reformatted but showing the exact same numbers. The conclusions were my conclusions, sometimes reworded but often using my exact phrasing. Professor David Morrison had stolen my thesis, made minor edits, and published it under his name as sole author. I sat in the break room of the consulting firm, staring at my laptop screen, feeling physically sick. 2 years of work, my original research, my ideas, my words, and he'd taken it all and claimed it as his own. I wasn't listed as a co-author. I wasn't acknowledged in the footnotes. My thesis wasn't cited as a source. It was as if I didn't exist, as if I'd never done the research at all. I immediately emailed my former roommate from Northwestern, Casey, who was still finishing her senior year. Can you access the library's thesis database? I need you to check if my honors thesis is still available. She wrote back an hour later. Yeah, it's there. Uploaded last June. Why? Download a copy and send it to me, please. It's important. She sent me the PDF. I opened it and my own thesis from 6 months earlier, comparing it side by side with Morrison's published article. The similarities were undeniable. This wasn't a case of overlapping research or coincidental findings. This was plagiarism. This was theft. I spent the rest of that day documenting everything. I created a comparison document showing Morrison's article alongside my thesis, highlighting identical passages. I noted every graph that was the same, every data point that matched, every structural similarity. Then I did something I probably should have done first. I Googled "professor plagiarized student thesis" to see if this had happened to other people. It had. Multiple times. Academic journals and news sites had covered cases of professors stealing student work and publishing it as their own. Some students had successfully fought back. Others had been too intimidated or hadn't had enough evidence. I had evidence. My thesis was time-stamped, submitted to the university in May, publicly available in their digital archive. Morrison's article had been submitted to the journal in August, 3 months after I'd submitted my thesis and published in December. I emailed Professor Morrison first, kept it professional but direct. Dr. Morrison, I recently came across your article in JDCS about echo chambers and Gen Z political beliefs. I noticed significant similarities between your published work and my honors thesis that you advised. Many passages appear to be directly taken from my thesis without attribution. I'd like to discuss this with you as soon as possible. He responded within 2 hours. Sophie, good to hear from you. I'm not sure what you're referring to. My article draws on several years of research I've been conducting. If there are similarities to your thesis, it's because we worked on related topics and I incorporated some of the approaches we discussed during your research process. This is common in academia. Advisors and students often work on overlapping research. I'm happy to discuss this further if you have concerns. The response made me angrier. He was trying to gaslight me, suggesting that because he'd been my advisor, he somehow had rights to my work. That discussing approaches meant he could take my entire research project and publish it as his own. I forwarded his email to the chair of the communications department at Northwestern, Dr. Patricia Chen, along with my comparison document showing the plagiarism. Dr. Chen, I'm writing to report a serious case of academic misconduct. My former thesis advisor, Professor Morrison, has published an article that plagiarizes my honors thesis extensively. I've attached documentation showing identical passages, data, and structural elements. My thesis was submitted in May. His article was submitted in August. I'm requesting that the university investigate this matter. Dr. Chen responded the next day, saying she'd received my email and would look into it. She asked if I could send her the full thesis and the published article, which I did immediately. 2 days later, she called me. Sophie, I've reviewed the materials you sent. This is very concerning. The similarities are extensive and appear to constitute plagiarism. I've forwarded this to the university's Research Integrity Office. They'll be conducting a formal investigation. What happens now? I asked. The Integrity Office will contact Professor Morrison and request his response. They'll examine all the evidence, including submission dates, drafts, communication between you two. This process typically takes several weeks. In the meantime, I'd recommend you also contact the journal that published the article. I contacted the Journal of Digital Communication Studies, explaining that I was a recent graduate whose honors thesis appeared to have been plagiarized by a professor and published in their journal. I attached the same comparison documents. The editor-in-chief responded within 48 hours. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We take allegations of plagiarism very seriously. We will be conducting our own investigation and have placed a hold on the article pending the outcome. Over the next 3 weeks, I gathered more evidence. I found all my draft documents, early versions of chapters, data analysis spreadsheets, research notes, all with timestamps showing I'd created them during my senior year, months before Morrison submitted his article. I found email chains between Morrison and me, where I'd sent him chapters for feedback. The emails proved that I'd written the content, sent it to him, and he'd reviewed it as my advisor. I even found a document where Morrison had left comments on my draft using track changes. His comments were suggestions and edits, clearly responding to my original work, proving he hadn't written it. Northwestern's Research Integrity Office interviewed me in early January. I met with them via video call and walked through all the evidence. They seemed shocked by how extensive the plagiarism was. "Has Professor Morrison contacted you directly since you reported this?" one investigator asked. "He sent me one email trying to suggest this was normal advisor-student overlap. I didn't respond." "That's good. Don't communicate with him directly. Let us handle this through official channels." The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, I started my spring semester at Columbia. I told my graduate advisor, Professor Elena Rodriguez, what was happening. She was furious on my behalf. "This is theft," she said. "Academic theft. If Morrison gets away with this, it sets a terrible precedent. You're doing the right thing by fighting it." In late February, Northwestern's Research Integrity Office released their findings. They'd determined that Professor Morrison had engaged in serious research misconduct by plagiarizing a student's honors thesis and publishing it as his sole authored work without attribution or permission. The university's response was swift. Morrison was placed on administrative leave. The case was referred to a faculty review board for potential termination. The university issued a formal statement acknowledging the plagiarism and apologizing to me. The Journal of Digital Communication Studies retracted Morrison's article with a notice explaining that it contained substantial plagiarized content from an unpublished student thesis. But retraction wasn't enough for me. I wanted my research published properly, with my name on it. I contacted the journal and proposed that they publish a corrected version of the article with me as first author. I'd do additional analysis, update some sections, but the core research would remain properly attributed to me this time. The journal agreed. They wanted to right the wrong, and publishing my work under my own name accomplished that. I spent March revising the paper, working with the journal's editors to address reviewer comments and strengthen certain sections. In April, they published my article, Echo Chambers and Political Polarization: How Social Media Algorithms Shape Gen Z Political Beliefs by Sophie Reyes. My name, my research. Finally, the article included a note explaining the unusual publication circumstances. This article is based on the author's honors thesis completed at Northwestern University in 2023. An earlier version of this research was published under another author's name due to plagiarism and has been retracted. This publication corrects that scholarly record. Professor Morrison was fired by Northwestern in May. The faculty review board unanimously voted to terminate his employment for grave research misconduct. His other publications were reviewed, and while they didn't find additional plagiarism, his reputation was destroyed. He tried to fight the termination, hired a lawyer, claimed the university was overreacting, but the evidence was too clear. He'd stolen a student's work and tried to pass it off as his own. There was no defending that. Other students started coming forward after his firing, not with plagiarism allegations, but with stories of Morrison taking credit for their ideas, pressuring them to let him be listed as co-author on their work when he hadn't contributed, creating a lab environment where students' research was treated as communal property he could claim whenever convenient. None of it rose to the level of the plagiarism he'd committed against me, but it painted a picture of someone who'd been exploiting students for years. I received messages from other graduate students and early career researchers thanking me for standing up to Morrison. Several people said they'd experienced similar situations but hadn't reported it because they were afraid of retaliation or didn't think anyone would believe them. "You gave me hope that reporting academic misconduct can actually work," one PhD student wrote. "I've been dealing with my advisor taking credit for my work, and I've been too scared to say anything. Seeing you successfully fight back made me realize I need to document everything and report him. That's when I realized this was bigger than just my stolen thesis. This was about a culture in academia where professors sometimes treat students' work as their own, where power imbalances make students afraid to speak up, where plagiarism by senior scholars against junior researchers happens more often than people want to admit." I started speaking publicly about my experience. I did an interview with the Chronicle of Higher Education about plagiarism in academia. I wrote an op-ed for Inside Higher Ed about protecting student intellectual property. I spoke on panels at academic conferences about research ethics. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of students and early career researchers reached out with their own stories. Some had experienced outright plagiarism. Others had been pressured into listing advisors as co-authors when those advisors hadn't contributed. Some had found their dissertation chapters published by advisors without permission. I connected people with resources, university ombudsmen, research integrity offices, legal advice. I helped students document evidence and file complaints. Some cases resulted in retractions and discipline. Others went nowhere because there wasn't enough proof or the institutions protected the faculty member. But at least people were talking about it. At least the issue was being acknowledged instead of swept under the rug. My published article ended up being well cited. It became a key piece in the growing body of research on social media and political polarization. I've been invited to present my findings at conferences, and graduate programs have used it in their coursework. That's what should have happened from the beginning, my research being recognized under my name, contributing to the field, building my career. Instead, I had to fight for 8 months to reclaim work that was always mine. Morrison tried to contact me once after his termination. He sent an email to my Columbia address. I don't know how he got it, claiming that he'd made a terrible mistake and asking if I'd be willing to write a letter supporting his applications to other universities. I deleted the email without responding. He'd stolen my work, lied about it, and only admitted wrongdoing when the evidence was irrefutable. He didn't deserve my help rebuilding a career he destroyed through his own unethical behavior. I'm 24 now, finishing my first year of graduate school at Columbia. My thesis publication has already helped me secure a research assistant position with a prominent professor in my field, someone with integrity who would never plagiarize a student's work. I'm building the academic career I always wanted, starting with research that's properly credited to me. Morrison is somewhere looking for work, probably not in academia given that his firing and the plagiarism scandal are well documented. I don't know where he is now, and I don't care. What I care about is that I fought back. That I didn't let him get away with stealing my work. That I stood up for myself even though he was a powerful professor and I was a recent graduate with no institutional backing. If I'd stayed silent, Morrison would still be teaching, still publishing, still exploiting students. My research would exist only as a thesis few people would ever read, while he'd get credit for my ideas and my work. Instead, my research is published under my name. Morrison's career is over. And students at Northwestern and beyond know that their work is protected, that plagiarism by faculty will be taken seriously, that they can fight back if someone tries to steal their intellectual property. That's worth more than any single publication. That's worth the 8 months of fighting, the stress, the anger, the hours spent documenting evidence. Because academic integrity matters, student work matters, and refusing to let powerful people exploit vulnerable ones matters most of all. Professor Morrison taught me a lot during my senior year about research methods, about academic writing, about navigating my field. But the most important lesson he taught me, he didn't intend to teach. He taught me that I'm strong enough to stand up to someone who tries to take what's mine, that I can fight injustice even when the system is designed to protect the powerful over the powerless. That's a lesson worth learning. Even if I wish I'd learned it a different way,